Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Jhabhaskar. In the third bi-monthly monetary policy of the current fiscal, Raghuram Rajan, Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, has decided to keep the key policy rates unchanged. The Reserve Bank of India today kept the benchmark repo rate unchanged at 7.25% as well as the cash reserve ratio at 4%. However, it trimmed the consumer inflation forecast for January-March 2016 by 0.2% and said that growth was beginning to look up gradually. Various stakeholders, including the Finance Ministry led by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, demanded that the RBI should cut rates to boost growth. Indian exports have stagnated over the past few months and corporate earnings in the first quarter of the current fiscal have been unenthusiastic. In this context, India Inc. has been demanding a rate cut, but RBI focused on more macro issues like inflation and monsoon. RBI has also said that government economic reforms and the timing of any increase in US interest rates would be key factors that will determine future rate cuts. In today's edition of Insight, I'm asking my panelists how serious is the situation facing the Indian economy and if the decision of the RBI governor to not to go for a rate cut is much on the expected lines. And joining me for more on this very esteemed guest with me from Professor at NIPFP, Professor Bhanumurthy. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us in this program. Also with me, Professor P. Pullar Rao, Senior Economist. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in this program. With me, Ashok Das Gupta, Senior Business Journalist. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in this program. So in the first segment, let's try and understand the RBI versus inflation target and very much the challenges for Indian economy. Coming back to you, Professor Bhanumurthy, very much on the expected lines, Raghuram Rajan's decision to keep the rates unchanged?
Yeah, I think today's policy is very much on the expected line. It's almost like a non-event. I mean, if you look at the press statement, there's nothing really much to really highlight, except to say that the RBI kept on saying that they have front-loaded the interest rate cuts. The transmission mechanism is not really active in a sense that transmission from repo rate to lending rate is less than 50%.
And he was referring to the central banks here, the public sector banks.
Public sector banks. So, I mean, he was highlighting that it's only 30 basis points has been transmitted through lending rates cut. So, basically the RBI is saying that they have done their duty. It's for the public sector banks to act upon whatever the credit policy that has been taken up. And at the same time, some of the positives that they are highlighting is particularly in terms of the government decision in terms of infusing capital to the public sector banks, which I think I have been arguing in many of the Lok Sabha TV meetings. That's one of the major way through which you can revive the economy. I think that's been recognized, and the supplementary demand that the government has taken up last week clearly show that 12,000 crores would be infused in the current financial year. So I think there are a lot of positives that happened since the last credit policy that's been highlighted.
So you're saying it is very much on the expected lines that Raghuram Rajan decided not to go for any further rate cut, and the next monetary policy review, which is likely to happen in the last week of September, that's when we'll get to know what actually happens, whether the governor actually decides to go for another rate cut or not. But Professor Pullar Rao, there are issues like retail inflation, which has actually gone up to an 8-month high of 5.4% in June from 5.01% in May. This was actually high on agenda because this is something where RBI is very cautious, inflation and again monsoon. These are two areas where it is very clear that nothing going, and you cannot take that one step backwards by introducing a rate cut. You have to be very cautious there.
But there are also two other factors which the RBI governor has always talked about. Oil prices, and they have come down, and they are going to contribute to this consumer price index coming down very soon. And the international environment is quite good. The international environment financially, or what the US is going to do with their quantitative easing, that also satisfies him. Out of 4 factors or 5 factors which he says he always looks at before taking this view on the rate cut, here 3 are very fine. So we all expected some kind of movement that rather than be totally on the side of caution, he will cut it because the government, the industry, agriculture, everybody is demanding it. And the monsoon is not as bad as was expected to be. which he expressed 2 months ago in June. Now it's not bad. Therefore, I am a little disappointed because just when things are needed, you know, more financial, and there is a whole school of international economists who say you should always err on the wrong side of easier money. You see, inflation is not the only thing which can, it's now under control.
Okay, so you're saying situation is very conducive and situation was very conducive for the governor to actually go for a 25 basis points rate cut, and he could have been a bit more, instead of actually shedding off his cautious attitude, he could have been a bit lenient on that. But Mr. Dasgupta, the index of industrial production in May slowed to 2.7% from 5.6% a year ago. Major reason for demanding a rate cut from the industrial side, from the industry sector, that go for a rate cut which can actually boost growth, boost investment, also boost industrial production, but not happening.
True, but that is, I would say, the lower end of the chain. You see, why industrial production is down as compared to last year, I think one of the main reasons is that there has not been adequate consumer demand for any of the products. You name autos, white goods, electrical, other appliances, you know, the demand has been very muted.
Right.
It's only recently that there is some pickup seen in, let's say, the auto sector. Now, what has happened because of the slowdown earlier is that most of the units are working at much less than their capacity, say about 60, 65, 70% of their capacity. Now, if they have to create more capacity, they first need to reach their capacity utilization levels, 90-95%. Now that cushion is still there. And it is only when consumer demand picks up. Now one would argue that consumer demand will pick up only if interest rates come down.
Right.
Now auto sector, because of the transmission of 30 basis points, I think the total was 75 cut. There's still half the basis points cut that has to be transmitted. I do not see much of a point of reducing by another 25% when the banks are already in arrears. Now banks have a genuine problem. First, they're loaded with NPAs. Second, their deposits at right now is at a higher peg.
Right.
You know, for senior citizens, etc., who do most of the fixed deposit savings, it's still at 9.25, 9.3%.
Right. So you're saying that if the RBI
margin
governor
gets squeezed. So, as Professor Pullara was saying, it's better to err on the side of, you know, easier money.
Right.
I would tend to disagree, because what difference does just about 60 days mean? It doesn't make much of a difference. I think it's better, and what he has done, he didn't spring a surprise. And in fact, this year, I didn't see much of a clamor from India Inc. or from any other quarter that they want.
Now, I also have a basic question. Why is it that every time when we talk about the monetary policy review, we also talk about a rate cut? Why is it that that whole rate cut demand starts coming out with the monetary policy review?
You see, a rate cut of 25 basis points is not the end all of the whole our industrial production and monetary policy. It is only a small element. It is a signal to the banks that you should reduce your rates. Now, if, like our traffic violations, the banks do not heed that signal and they're still in arrears, what's the point in adding another?
And the question is, do investments really go up with the 25 or the 50 basis points reduction?
It doesn't.
Because we haven't seen that impact. Even the consumption, for that matter, if you really bring down, if you introduce this rate cut from 25 to 50 basis points, how far it has an impact on consumption? Have you done any study on that?
Actually, I'm glad that you raised this issue. I mean, I think I have been arguing on this for quite some time. I'm sure many of my panelists in the past also disagreed with me when I argued that interest rate cut alone is not sufficient enough to revive the investments.
Right.
In fact, I have written a piece on the title is Misplaced Faith on Interest Rate Cuts. I have been criticized on this particular article, I think in 2013. The argument that I was giving is investment has a lot of determinants. Okay.
Right.
The repo rate is only a one channel of monetary policy. As I said in the beginning, the transmission matters a lot. At the moment, we have been arguing, at least myself, that interest rate channel of transmission mechanism is the weakest at the moment. It is the bank lending channel that is we need to really focus on. And I think in 2014, I have already highlighted that time, there is no other way for the government to revive investments other than by increasing recapitalization of banks. Okay, so that is one thing that.
And that's also coming back on the agenda of the government.
No, we already done. I mean, it's not just done for the 1 year. I think for the next 4 years.
We have, and we're trying to recapitalize the banks, and especially this whole fight of non-performing assets. And
otherwise, the public sector banks, which are sitting on huge NPAs, are not going to do any business. And at the same time, we do have a stickiness on the deposit rates.
Right. So what I understand at this stage, out of my 3 panelists, 2 of them think that it is a good decision, and one thinks that the RBI governor could have actually gone for a cut of 25 basis points at least. But it's now time for me to take a short break. Next, when we come back on the other side of this break, we'll also try and understand the economic reform agenda of the government in connection with the RBI, and also the latest debate on a committee which will take away the veto power of the RBI governor. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. In today's edition, we are focusing on RBI's monetary policy review. Right, so third bi-monthly monetary policy statement says that in India, the economic recovery is still work in progress after strong rainfall in June. July has been below par, but on net, the monsoon is near normal. So monsoon and inflation, 2 deciding factors for the governor not to change the rate cut. Coming back to you, Professor Bhanumurthy, as far as important sectors are concerned, the governor has also talked about the services sector, which continues to emit mixed signals, and the pickup in heavy commercial vehicle sales and rising port and domestic air freight suggests that there is strengthening of transportation activity. So mixed signals from services sector. In your opinion, which are the sectors, crucial sectors, which still need a lot of input and support from the government?
Within the service sector?
Within the services and otherwise also.
See, I think, for us, the manufacturing is definitely a backbone. You know, service sector cannot perform if we have a weak manufacturing sector, particularly in the absence of no external demand. I think in the report, if you look at very clearly, the RBI makes it very clear there is no way the exports are going to revive in the immediate future, because right now it's growing at much lower than 5 years kind of export growth. So in the absence of exports, I think we need to revive the domestic demand. That's only, as Mr. Dasgupta already pointed out, we need to see the manufacturing sector growth through raising domestic demand. Whether it can happen through interest rate cut, that's a different story altogether. So the service sector, coming back to the service sector can grow only when you see the recovery in the manufacturing sector. Having said that, there are also some kind of issues that the review highlights, particularly in the infrastructure sector. You know, we have seen a lot of action on the coal segment, but suddenly we don't see the production in power sector going up. You know, so there's, I mean, we only addressed one part of this, the power sector, that is the coal part, but I mean, there are other So you're referring to the coal block allocation, and despite the coal block allocations, we haven't seen the capacity addition going up. Particularly because of the transmission issues, because of the financial conditions of the state electricity. Right, so demand and supply gap, transmission losses, there are several other issues. So there are still many other things, but there are a lot of small things I think the government needs to do. Again, it is not the central government alone. I mean, it's the state governments. I think if you look at the power sector, half of the story is in the state government. Right. I think we need to make them also to be responsible. Right, and especially when you talk about the power sector reforms, the cooperative federalism model it really needs a lot of boost both from the central and the state government, and we have seen the way the last governing council meeting was not even attended by many chief ministers because of several important issues. But coming back to the important sectors, the report also says that domestic consumption is still weak, but manufacturing activity picked up in July, and strengthening exports and corporate profitability could stimulate capital spending. Now, overall, in that scenario, we are basically referring to domestic consumption. But what about the export-driven economy? How far, are we going? Are we really slow on that, or do you see moments of revival happening in the coming future?
See, there are 3 things in the report. He mentions very vaguely, Purchasing Managers Index, which says it has contracted in June, but it doesn't mention it has gone up now. You know, the growth is there. The index shows very favorable, optimistic conditions. The same index, latest figures show that there's been better performance there, more expectations, more orders are placed. It is essentially a calendar of expectations, which is very positive. But that he's silent on that. I don't know why.
Okay.
And as you have also said, we need not depend on exports for growth. When the international climate is not good, they definitely cannot take our exports. When the economies all over the world, except the US economy to some extent, has contracted, exports are not something you look forward to. But there is domestic demand.
Right.
How do you stimulate domestic demand? You don't do it like the Chinese have done, having an extensive over surplus in every sector of capacity. Which has led them now to a situation where their stock market, you don't need that.
Right.
You don't need going on for infrastructure or something. You have to have a more even creation of domestic demand, you know, in a very calibrated way, so that our manufacturing sector also addresses a much needed, you know, consumer demand in this country, requirements. And as you said, the power sector, all this also requires a great dose of good governance.
Right.
You know, it's not having, as Professor Bhanumurthy and Professor Mr. Dasgupta have said, just money need not be the only criteria. You must have other inputs like good governance. And there, cooperative federalism or whatever, there's still a sort of unjunction, you know, we are not able to coordinate with the state.
Okay, you're saying there's the lack of convergence as far as ideas are concerned, and maybe the state government's moving in a different direction and the central government moving in the other direction. But overall, when we talk about the economic policy review, what is it that you think that for RBI governor is high on agenda? Which sectors are high on agenda? Because he's also talked about how financial markets all across the globe are experiencing turbulence. He's referred to the Greek crisis, the Chinese stock market slump, and shifts between risk on and risk off sentiments based on changes in beliefs about when the Federal Reserve will start raising rates. So overall, you know, even the international economic scenario is not very conducive for the economy to really go on a smooth track.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at this year, it seems very uncertain for a number of reasons. You see, first you had the Greek crisis.
Right.
Now, although India is not directly impacted by Greece, but the financial implications, it gets impacted. Now, that has reached a solution. On the other side, you have the US Fed chief saying that they will be raising rates in September. Now that, although it may be temporary and the impact will not be as severe as it would have been earlier, because we are now comfortable on the fundamentals and reserves, etc. But then if it comes in September, that's a big question mark. And then the overall recovery that was perceived to be taking place is not really happening. You look at US itself, you know, 1 month it's on, 1 month it's off. You know, you have one positive data, you have one negative data, and that is why, you know, it is very uncertain. Eurozone is in a crisis itself still. So when you talk about exports, and what is the basket of exports that we mainly have? If you leave aside the iron ore and all, which China used to consume more, the other things are very labor intensive items in a sense, and they are not basic goods that everybody would need. It's not like the Chinese exports that they do. You know, what we export is gems and jewelry, leather items, accessories, you know, fashionable garments, etc. Now, these come in the purchase list of people at the last moment when they have enough. So, obviously, our exports will be a bit subdued. Now, the other thing is...
And also, if the global economic scenario is not very conducive, automatically the demand for our exports will also go down.
Exactly.
So,
that's
because
what I'm
the
saying.
purchasing part not just the purchasing part not just in our country but even abroad has gone down.
Correct.
So that
I mean,
will affect.
If somebody has some dollars, he'll keep it to pay his next bill. He will not go and buy a leather garment or gems and jewelry.
I'll come back to you, Mr. Gupta, but quickly, Professor Bhanumurthy, because when you're talking about the rate cut and the RBI monetary policy review, there's also a news story doing rounds about RBI agreeing on the Monetary Policy Committee panel, which is actually going to decide whether RBI governor should have a final veto power on deciding what should be the rate cut and whether on the monetary policy review. Do you have any clarity on that? Because the controversy, we don't know much of it, that who is going to take a final call and what's this committee? Is this actually a reflection of a gap between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy and the gap between the finance ministry and the central bank?
No, frankly, until last week, we did find a coordination between the central bank and the central government in most of the policies. Talk about front loading of interest rate cuts, talk about front loading of capital expenditure by the government, talk about recapitalization of banks. So there is very good coordination between the central government and central bank until last week. After this report came out, thanks to again finance ministry, it has created a huge confusion both among the analysts as well as the press. What exactly this the IFC the draft mean? And we have been seeing for the past 3 days the kind of confusion, and in fact yesterday the finance secretary has created more confusion. But we are yet to hear the official view on what this monetary policy committee is going to be. But
there was a mention of this also in the budget document when there was a talk of having a monetary policy committee.
The talk about monetary policy committee is there since Urjit Patel committee came out in 2014, and in fact it was also part of the FSLRC. I mean, when it submitted the report. So there is no disagreement on having monetary policy committee per se, but there are disagreements on the composition as well as the independence of the
composition and independence, because how does this, how do you see this having an impact on the autonomy of the RBI governor?
See, the former governor, Venugopal Reddy, gave a very clear issue. He says our governor of the RBI can be discharged without giving any reason by the government at any time.
There
is no fixed term, there is no status given to him by clearance by the parliament or some other statutory thing. That's what he said yesterday. Therefore, he is a creation of the government, given independent powers to function within a certain limit. Even whether you have 7 members or 4 members, I believe that the government exercises overall competence to do what it wants as per the present act.
Mr. Dasgupta, is this a reflection of an exhaustion from the government side of why you are not cutting rates? Is this primarily because of this reason? Monetary policy, we need the finance ministry must have a say on how far you can not go or go with the rate cuts?
See, as I said, if you go back during the UPA regime, I'm talking about the fag-in days of the Chidambaram
and Subbarao.
Subbarao. You know, they were never on the same page. And the controversy came out in the open. The finance ministry, the government wanted rate tweaking. Subbarao didn't do it. And it was out in the open. And even the after comments were very sort of, he was very unhappy. When this government started off, things were smooth. It seemed that they were all on the same page, except for when this report came out and the controversy seems to have surfaced again. Now, what is the origin of this controversy? I see it like this. You see, as a government, as a political party, the government would like to see growth. Now, how is that growth to be achieved? Maybe certain sections feel that interest rates are eased, things will work wonders, and everything will be hunky-dory.
And the fact that the central government also needs to offer some explanation that why the interest rates are not being cut, how to actually motivate, as rightly pointed out.
Now, when you are talking about this committee, you know, the point is whether the RBI governor should have the veto power or not. I feel, my personal view is that if you remove the veto power from the RBI, the central governor, then that person could as well be a babu from anywhere. He could be sitting there.
So you personally disagreeing with the decision of not giving veto power to the RBI governor. It's now time for me to take a short break. Next, when we come back, we'll also try and understand the big debate, inflation versus growth, and how far RBI can move ahead with these inflation targets, and how will this really have an impact on the targets set by the government. We'll also try and understand the big land acquisition and GST bill high on agenda for the government, its economic reform agenda. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You are watching Insight. In today's edition, we are focusing on RBI's monetary policy review. Right, so in our final segment, what's the road ahead and economic agenda of the government? Coming back to you, Professor Bhanumurthy, what's the road ahead and the economic agenda of the government at this stage? Do you see the industry, the central bank and the government, how they're moving in the same, if they're moving in the same direction?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I mean that they are actually moving in the same direction, although it's a very difficult path. Particularly the reviving, investments in the country has been a very difficult aspect. There is definitely a very good coordination between fiscal and monetary. I mean, as I said earlier, the government of India has been doing it bit by containing the fiscal deficit as per the fiscal FRBM Act and all those things. And they also started front loading of public capital expenditure, which we have been arguing it.
Right.
And at the same time, I think the government is also lucky in the sense that they are also going to see a lower subsidy bill because of the decline in the international prices. So I think if you look at this kind of parameters, one would wonder that why we are not seeing the revival. But at the same time, the private investors seems to be still holding on their decision for the long-term investments. My guess is that there are other supply side issues, as I pointed out, particularly the power sector, and there are other legislative business that have been pending in the parliament, particularly on the land bill.
Which is having a direct impact on investment
now
scenario in the country.
There is some clarity on the land bill because they are going back to 2013.
Right.
I think there is some clarity on the land bill. Again, they are throwing that to the state governments.
Right.
Now the state governments have to decide.
Right, but the fact that there is no political consensus and the fact it is a constitutional amendment bill, you need the support of state governments to get it.
Now it has gone to the state
governments. Now it has gone to the state government. But I'm talking about GST also for that matter. You know, the fact that the rollout date was decided for April 1st, 2016, whether it will be a partial rollout or an overall rollout. But as far as the economic agenda of the government is concerned, Professor Rao, Make in India, Digital India, Skill India, Make in India, you know, you need investment, you need money to come in. With this scenario, with the present scenario, how far do you think that the overall economic environment is really conducive?
You see, I think they're very much on track because unexpected bonanza which they got from oil price being low is not only saving on the subsidy, it has a vast impact on all sectors. Things are cheaper, there is more money available, you take away, you know, so there's kind of, it has been a very glowing situation for the government on one side. Very easy situation to think of these plans. 1 or 2 lakh crores of cash they've got. And it also has a very benign influence. That's the word used by the RBI governor on the entire economy. You have infrastructure which can be built at a cheaper price. You can have railways dream up of big things. You can revive power projects. You can do a lot of things for India. Oil price is a very big parameter to decide anything. All these ideas would not have been possible to even contemplate had oil prices remained at $80, $90 a barrel. And the future shows the next 1 year, prices are going to be even less. And people are not going to stop producing oil because of that. That's the funny part of oil production. You've got to keep producing oil, keep selling it at lower prices if you want your wells to be operational. So as far as India is concerned, government is concerned, aside from the GST bill, you know, each time I also hesitate to say once industry and government says FDI, you open FDI, everything works. Nothing actually happens. Can you give good governance? Can you make business easy? If you can do those institutional reforms, what you already have, I think they're very much on track.
Okay, change the realities on ground instead of talking about big things like the Make in India, Skill India, Digital India. When we talk about Digital India, talk about the optical fiber network, which is still very poor. If you talk about the Make in India, the ease of doing business scenario, you know, ASSOCHAM and CII has a report saying that the ground realities haven't really changed. The single window clearance, land acquisition, all these issues, and of course the GST bill. Also, when we talk about the money aspect, the fiscal space of the government has improved thanks to the external oil situation. But in that scenario, how are you viewing the economy at this stage? You know, the fact that the government is actually on the right track, or it's not getting much support on crucial bills like the GST and the land acquisition?
Well, I would say the last one that you just mentioned. You see, if you look at the environment globally, as pointed out, oil prices at a low is a big positive for India. The subsidy bills have reduced, except for kerosene and partly LPG, it's reduced. The other thing, whenever the Prime Minister announces something like give up your LPG cylinders, the reaction has been really good. People have given up cylinders. So, and that is going to the rural areas. So to that effect, kerosene is no longer a cooking fuel. It is only for lamps. So we are running in the correct direction. But what is happening is that a lot of bills are there, as you mentioned, GST bill, land acquisition bill. There is, or till now has been, a political deadlock. Now take the GST bill for example. We have been talking about it since 2007.
Right.
Now when the Congress talked about it, the BJP opposed it. Various state governments opposed it. Now we have the BJP government, NDA government pushing it, we have the Congress opposing it. I do not understand why political parties should
just for sheer sake of political mileage.
Bills.
Right,
You know,
it was finance,
mileage.
and it was even the finance minister day before yesterday who clearly said that the opposition is hurting the economy by holding on to the GST.
And they turned around and said, you also did so when we were pushing it.
Yes, and we have seen this even yesterday when the speaker had to suspend a few MPs of the opposition because the House was not functioning properly. But final comments on the program. Overall, you know, if we talk about the economic environment, is the sentiment positive? You know, because we have seen the international rating agencies writing off our economy earlier, and now even the Moody recent, it was only a month ago when the Moody said that there is a policy stagnation being witnessed. Do you see a policy stagnation,
no,
or we are going in the right direction?
The government, the current government is also facing some of the constraints the previous government faced.
Okay.
I think that's a part. My view is that the sentiments have definitely improved, and at the same time, the whole responsibility of reviving growth seems to have shifted to state governments.
Okay. Okay.
I think that's very important. If you look at the inflation numbers also, if we are right now we have that state level inflation numbers also. I think one needs to really look at the inflation numbers from the states as well when we really talk about monetary policy and inflation. I think RBI also need to look at which region is generating more inflation. I think that's something. Cooperative federalism is not a right. I guess it's more of a responsibility, less of a right. I think they need to really...
So role of state governments is much bigger when we talk about the economic environment. So in the spirit of cooperative and competitive federalism, focus should also shift on how state governments are actually performing. And thanks to the 14th Finance Commission recommendations, which the government has accepted and improved the fiscal space of state governments.
It's a new thing for the state governments to have so much money. How they're going to do it, we discussed many times. Over the years, we'll come to know. But don't you find one thing very intriguing? The industry associations, the doyen of industries, they all keep quiet. Nobody has come forward and asked the government and the opposition, as they would do in other countries, that get together. The GST bill is for the country.
Passed.
Why aren't you getting together on this bill? Nobody has opened their mouth.
Okay.
Their silence is very shocking and intriguing.
Okay. Final comments from you, Mr. Dasgupta.
No, that's perhaps because they think that there will be a consensus and things will move forward.
That means only RBI listens to the association.
Because otherwise, you know, all these, you said Make in India, Digital India, unless there's positive work, all parties together work towards a national economic goal, all these will just remain campaign or slogans.
Right, but the fact is when you have Bihar Assembly elections and State Assembly elections listed even for the next year, what's high on agenda for these political parties, and for common issues can they really come together? As you rightly pointed out, GST is one such bill. Let's hope that it actually gets passed in this monsoon session before the monsoon session turns out to be a complete washout. But thankfully the House also worked today. Thank you very much, Professor Bhanumurthy, Professor Rao, and Mr. Dasgupta for joining us in this program. And that's all we have for you in this edition of Insight. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.